Hey everyone, we're talking about Jupiter moving into Gemini. This is part one of a two-parter. Before you get disappointed, the deep dive where I go into what this means from a news perspective, i.e. the collective events that happened last time Jupiter was in Gemini, and going through all that is going to be my deep dive in part two. This one is an introduction to Jupiter and Gemini. It talks about the high level of why I'm even doing a podcast on Jupiter into Gemini, where Jupiter is not technically an outer planet, but why I do think it's affecting the next year and why I think the next year is going to be game-changing from collective events and why I think astrological transits are going to shape that and why I'm even back in the first place and what's going on with Cosmic Alarm Clock and briefly with me. So that's what this podcast is about. This does not talk about personalized astrology. That's not what Cosmic Alarm Clock is about, but I do dip into how this will affect you. And I did a deep dive on the Sagittarius full moon, a very deep dive. It's only a 10-minute video, but I have a bunch of text running in the background that's different than what I'm saying. So it's literally like a 20-minute video, but in 10 minutes. And that's very Gemini. It's kind of like you could have like an aneurysm looking at that video. It's kind of over the top, but that is linked in my astrological transits playlist on YouTube. My channel is Success and Spirit. And why that's relevant is it ended up being more than a Sagittarius full moon video. It ended up being a deep masterclass on the axis of Sagittarius and Gemini. And how are those different in your day-to-day life? And how is the fact that the ruling planet of that full moon is literally moving into its opposite sign, i.e. its fall, days later. The full moon was Thursday morning, Thor's Day, which is Jupiter's day. The full moon phase ends, I think, on Sunday. So I believe we're still in the full moon phase or just out of it when Jupiter officially enters Gemini. So it's all related. And so in that, if you're interested in the archetypes of Gemini, how this might affect you right now, newsflash, this is in play for a year. You don't need to run. There's no prediction involved with it, but that is up for you. And the deep dive on the bigger aspects when I give a chance to dig into it, it'll probably be sometime next week or the week after. And again, this is in play until June of 2025. So I don't think a week or two is going to make a difference. And thank you for listening to A Cosmic Alarm Clock. Enjoy. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cosmic Alarm Clock podcast. Missed me? Confused? Am I back? I don't know. But today is a quick and dirty message, the Friday before Memorial Day, and Jupiter is about to move into Gemini. Jupiter spends about a year in each sign, and Jupiter will be in Gemini until June 7th, 2025. Now, I said I was going to leave Cosmic Alarm Clock, and I might, but Gemini is the sign of duality. And it's the sign of sales messaging, marketing, and mindset in non-business astrology, and a whole bunch of other stuff in mundane astrology. And it's also the side of flipping your mind. It's mutable air. It's changing what you want to do. And so I'm not sure if I'm going to do a deep dive on Jupiter entering Gemini from a mundane astrological perspective and put it up just as a video on YouTube or as a video on my Cosmic Alarm Clock playlist and then put the audio up here, because I'm not sure. I'm going to be doing a bunch of videos in the next year with the nodes switching in January of 2025. Pluto enters Aquarius for good in November of 2024. Neptune enters Aries in March of 2025. And Uranus enters Gemini in July of 2025. For those of you who don't really follow what that means, the fact that we have all of the outer planets switching signs within one calendar year, that's insane. To put it in perspective, Neptune and Uranus generally stay in a sign for Uranus stays in a sign for 8 years. I believe Neptune moved into Pisces in 2011. I'd have to check on that. And Pluto is somewhere in the middle. I believe Pluto entered a Capricorn in 2008. So they're all switching signs this year. So Jupiter entering And I apologize if there is a little bit of background noise. It's like 80 degrees where I live. So there's this crazy pop through of summer, and it's Memorial Day weekend. So people are losing their minds, literally. A lot of screaming and music outside. So Gemini, Jupiter in a sign is not a huge deal. Jupiter goes through one sign of the zodiac every year. It has a 12 or a 13-year cycle. If you heard any of my other content on Jupiter, I say that Jupiter is the storyteller. It's the story of your life, and it's going to have 12 chapters. Normally, Jupiter going into Gemini probably wouldn't be worthwhile for me to do a cosmic alarm clock podcast. Jupiter is not a personal planet. It's not an outer planet either. It's kind of like the last of the personal planets. Because to be honest, Jupiter is really going to come down to Jupiter in your chart. You lean into Jupiter in your chart, and that means the house, the sign, and the aspects, you're going to be more lucky. And so to take advantage of Jupiter and Gemini, you're going to lean into those placements. Jupiter is not quite an inner planet. It's not quite an outer planet. But because Jupiter is, in my opinion, going to be in Gemini when all of this other crazy shit's happening, that makes it a bigger deal. Because think of Jupiter as a flashlight. It is 300 times the size of the Earth. If you've ever seen a graphic from space and you've seen what Earth looks like next to Jupiter in real time or real picture, it is insane. It looks like a pea drop next to Jupiter. Jupiter's got its own freaking solar system. Jupiter is like its own thing. Jupiter is associated with the third eye. Jupiter is associated with the higher mind. It rules Sagittarius. There's so much to say about this, given all the collective energies we're going to have over the next year. If you guys are interested, currently on my YouTube channel, Success and Spirit. By the way, if you're not familiar with my brand, Success and Spirit, those three words together, I made it easy, is me everywhere. Success and Spirit on Instagram, successandspirit.com, Success and Spirit on TikTok, Success and Spirit on YouTube, Success and Spirit on Threads. Now, I'm not fully active on all those platforms, but I have all those brand handles in case I'm ever there in the future. Pick one of those that you like to be on and run wild. But on my Success and Spirit YouTube channel, and I'll link that in the show notes, I did a full moon in Sagittarius video. Now, normally I don't do full moon videos on my channel because they don't last long enough. And the way that the YouTube algorithm is two things. Number one, you've got to get that full moon video out approximately 7 to 10 days before the actual full moon in order to take advantage of that bump, because everyone wants to hear what the prediction is. And number two, you generally should do this for all signs, because the general population on YouTube wants horoscopes and they want a bunch of random bullshit. And I'll tell you right now that where your sun sign is or what your rising sign has fuck all to do with how this Gemini Jupiter placement is going to play out. If you've got something that this Jupiter transit is triggering, it's going to trigger it. Jupiter's a trigger. It's a fast-moving planet. Fast-moving planets are triggers. If you have a lot of planets in Gemini, well, then Jupiter's going to hit them like a pinball machine, or you've got like a T-square or an angle. It's going to trigger something. If you have Jupiter in Gemini, you're having a Jupiter return, which is lucky. Yay. But other than that, there's no way for me to, with any integrity, say anything about what's happening in your chart based on your rising sign or based on your sun sign. And that's what people on YouTube want. So I'm moving away from personalized astrology on YouTube. Guess what? I get to change my fucking mind. That's being an entrepreneur. And I'm going back to collective astrology. I looked back at when this brand started, post-channeling Kali, hello, she's made a return. And I was thinking, did the YouTube channel come first? Did the podcast come first? And I'd have to look up when the introduction to this podcast was, but I believe this podcast started on the Virgo full moon, which I believe was March or April of 2022. And I believe my first YouTube video was when Jupiter moved into Aries in May of 2022. So that means this podcast came first. And so whether or not I'm going to keep this podcast alive, it doesn't make sense to keep a podcast alive if you're not going to make regular content on it, since podcasts have no discoverability on their own. I'm not really sure. But for now, I'm coming on here to tell you what the fuck's up, because you're like, where have you been? Maybe the 3 people left listening to this. I'm letting you know that if you see podcasts disappearing, or I went through this weird phase of clearing, and I recut a lot of the episodes, the key ones, the ones that if you were to look back in 5 years in 2027, which is, or whatever, 3 years, 2027, which is when this podcast is meant to be. It's a 2020 to 2027 timeframe. 2027 is the cross of the rising phoenix in human design. And I believe that that's when we'll really, really get into the nitty gritty of this Pluto and Aquarius era. But, and I said this on a prior YouTube video, I think that 2020 to 2024 was part one. And I think that 2024 to 2027 is part two. So I do think that part two has started now. So 2027 is across the rising phoenix, which is what this era is. It's the transformation into the new paradigm. And it started when the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto conjunction in January of 2022. And I talked about that at length on this podcast. So of those all events, there's a couple of key things I talked about, a couple of key guest podcasts I did, and a couple of key things talking about the Saturn-Uranus square, talking about some of the stuff I just mentioned with the triple conjunction that are long lasting, that if you were to listen to this podcast in 2027 and try to piece together how we got here, those would still be relevant. And so what I did was I recut them to make them accessible for a YouTube audience, particularly because this doesn't have video associated with it. And I cut them to make them more succinct, less channeled. As you know, this was channeled through Kali, so a lot of my stuff was really harsh. It was rough. It was raw. It was not on a microphone. It was difficult to listen to if you just were to find it. So this is never going to be a curated, edited podcast, by the way. But that is, I recut them and I put select episodes on a playlist on my YouTube channel, a Cosmic Alarm Clock playlist. And whether or not this podcast is going to continue to be on here, is going to continue to be on YouTube, I don't know. Or I'm just going to do a playlist called Cosmic Alarm Clock on YouTube that's videos about collective astrology. That's probably what I'll do, but I don't know. So that's why those are disappearing. What you might find interesting or not is that I did a Pluto entering Aquarius podcast. I never put that up on YouTube, and it's up here. And that podcast was recorded 6 times. And the first time that I did it was when Pluto originally went back into Capricorn in around November of 2023. And then I finally put it up, I believe, when Pluto went into Aquarius this spring of 2024. And something tells me I'm going to scrap that again and redo the whole thing, or have it do a part one or part two, because there's a bunch of videos I've done of Pluto moving into Aquarius. They've never gone up on YouTube. And I think it's because it's not over until it's over. Pluto does not enter Aquarius until post the election. I talked about a lot of things about how Pluto with the nodes, if you go back and listen to my nodal axis video, I talked about that axis of Taurus Scorpio, and I talked about sex rings coming out, and I talked about the downfall of shit coming out, and I talked about Harvey Weinstein. And we've seen what's happened with P. Diddy. We saw that, Cat Williams said at the beginning of 2024, this is going to be the year of the reckoning. And that's Pluto. Pluto will not leave Capricorn without stones unturned. And you can see, I talked about this in prior episodes. We were talking about this Pluto holding onto control structures. We were talking about that. And we were talking about the abortion pill and the crazy shit that happened in 2022, which seemed so out of left field and seemed so crazy. And what are we seeing now? In the news right now, they're trying to claim that this abortion pill is dangerous so that they can find a loophole to have it outlawed. Right? They are holding motherfucking on. And you're interested in mundane astrology, you're picking up what I'm putting down. This is also an election year. Pluto is going to enter Aquarius right after the U.S. election, which I think is a big deal. I've already talked about it in the prior episode, but this is already a weird election. We've got a prior president who's on trial, a incumbent president that is generally never even challenged. The race was basically over before it started because the two candidates, the finalists, were in play from like February, unheard of. This is a weird fucking year. We've got the oldest president on record who looks like he's about to keel over, and people are questioning his sanity, myself included. And then you've got a guy who's a former criminal. I think he's currently on trial. And the reason I sound so ignorant about this is because I literally do not watch this stuff because it frustrates me how much time and energy we're spending on something when the world is going to hell in a handbasket. The point is that this was meant to be about Jupiter in Gemini. And this is why Cosmic Alarm Clock is what it is. It's this channeled weird thing. And I don't know if there's a place for it or not. But Jupiter moving into Gemini May of 2026. Oh, weird. Why did I stutter and say May of 2026? And the reason for that is because Uranus will move into Gemini. It will go back. It'll dip back. And then it'll go in for good in 2026. So next year is a preview. But the fact that Jupiter is going to be in Gemini as a preview to Uranus moving into Gemini, well, AI? Controlling the mind? Where are you being brainwashed? The news? Gemini? I have a lot to say about Gemini in business, and I did talk at length about the axis of Sagittarius and Gemini and how they are the axis of learning and the axis of the teacher and what that means for us as humans. It's basically rewriting your day-to-day mental stories so you can craft a new vision for your life. If Sagittarius is the vision for your life, then Gemini is how am I co-creating that on a day-to-day basis, law of attraction, mindset, beliefs about yourself, all of the stuff people talk about in manifestation. Manifestation is not about asking what you want. Manifestation is reprogramming your subconscious mind and your conscious brain to be open to what is going to come into your life. And that's why a lot of people talk about, quote, the science of manifestation. I do believe in a Uranian element. I do believe in there's an unseen element that is beyond our understanding, that is operating outside of what we can prove. But if you want to just talk about the science of manifestation, there's a lot of brain science that's just focused on allowing yourself to see what can come into your life. And so with Gemini beliefs, how can you craft the bigger story for your life and the bigger vision for your life if on a day-to-day reality you don't believe it? So my Jupiter and Gemini challenge, I'm like, why the fuck are you doing a podcast for Cosmic Alarm Clock right now? Who's going to listen to this? What's the point of having it up on Cosmic Alarm Clock? But this is where it wants to go. And I'm doing this random, spontaneous podcast because I want to. And that's Sacral Response, and that's Human Design, and that's my new podcast. If Cosmic Alarm Clock is collective astrology, mundane astrology, it doesn't matter if you're a business owner, it doesn't matter if you're an astrology geek, it doesn't matter if you are someone who's into the news. Obviously, you're going to be one of at least two out of those three if you're listening to this podcast. But my other podcast is very niche. My other podcast is The Aligned Alchemist. It is for business owners and leaders who want to work with human design, mindset, and do personal development in a new way. And that's what The Aligned Alchemist is about for now. And it may spread beyond that. But right now, that's the vision for who it is. And so that podcast is talking about human design. And that podcast is about doing things as a business owner in line with your body. And one of the things about the sacral is you don't use it, you lose it. So I had this energy to do this now. And I was like, oh, this doesn't really make any sense. And relax, people, we've got a year. So the fact that we're going to talk about Jupiter and Gemini next week is not going to change anything. Because this isn't about your chart. And even if I was going to pretend to make it about your chart, which is what people on YouTube do, they pretend to make it about you so you click on the fucking video, it still doesn't matter. It's still in your chart wherever it's going to be for a year. When I do that, I'll also talk about the human design gates it's going to go through in the body graph. So you get a sense of what particular gates, if it's activating in the body graph chart. And that talks also about what particular themes are going to be up in society. I'll talk about the news. I'll talk about all that. And if you already got what you wanted to get out of it because you already kind of got the gist of it from this video or this podcast, well, yay. So that's what's going on with Cosmic Alarm Clock. The answer is, I don't know. That's why the podcasts are disappearing. They'll probably all disappear, but curated versions of stuff that is relevant for you to know if you're new to this podcast are on my YouTube channel, Success and Spirit. If I continue to do this podcast, all episodes of this will go up on my channel. And if I don't continue to drop these through Spotify, Apple, then if I do any episodes, they will also be on my YouTube channel or they'll be standalone videos. Thanks for listening. See you on the other side. Stay tuned for a deep dive on Jupiter and Gemini.